All right, so thanks again for
Hmm.
um, honoring this invitation. And I would like to invite you to start giving a brief introduction about yourself and
Hmm.
your role.
Okay. Right. So right now, I'm actually a supply chain director at a company here in Toronto, Canada. Been around, supply chain, worked in supply chain for over 20 years. Started off as a, production operations manager with responsibility from warehousing, logistics, and also
Okay.
production planning as well. Did that for 5 years. I worked in retail for 7 years as a director of supply chain. I also worked as a vice president of supply chain here in Toronto as well for a large retailer, and in various other roles, supply chain consulting. I did that for 3 years on projects mostly in the U.S., in Canada, and even as far away as Asia as well. So essentially, I've always been around supply chain management, logistics. I enjoy it. It's a field that I enjoy quite a bit. And yeah, so I continue to. I actually teach in that field as well. I've been doing that for more than 10 years.
Okay.
At both at some colleges here in Toronto as well as distance online at a university back in the Caribbean. So I definitely spent a lot of time in supply chain management, logistics, and
Okay.
yeah, I think it's a field that has a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of change and dynamics happening right now. So yeah, it's one that I enjoy for sure. Looking to continue to build up my career in this field for sure.
That's interesting. That's a huge number of years of experience from various aspects of the chain, inventory, all those aspects. That's quite, which means that we're going to get more insight from you from this interview.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
yes,
Hopefully.
yeah. As you said, you have a kind of academic kind of teaching and
Hmm.
more of
Hmm.
industrial experience, but we would like to push you a little bit to the practitioner perspective,
Hmm.
more uh, from the academia. So probably we would like to ask, because we know that there's this gap between academia and industry, and there's this issue of theory not quite known or quite understood from the practitioner perspective. So I just want to know what your understanding, if you have some familiarity with theory throughout your.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I do. Even though I've worked in supply chain for more than 20 years, I also did formal training as well. So I did, it used to be known as APICS, now it's ASCM, the Association
Okay.
for Supply Chain Management. So I've
Okay.
done their CPIM course, I've done the CIRM and the CSCP, Certified Supply Chain Professional. So, and also I actually did a master's in operations management that touched on supply chain management as well.
Okay.
So in doing those courses, in pursuing that master's, I was exposed obviously to supply chain management theories and some aspect of that.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, there's certainly relevance to those theories. It helped me to understand the field I was getting into and I was practicing. So
Okay.
it did put structure and it did put familiarity around what you were seeing in the practical and in the real world. So, for sure, the theories are beneficial from an education and helping you to understand the industry you're working in perspective.
Okay.
Where there might be some disconnect is that so the theories are great, but theories, they
Okay.
work they're very good at describing a particular scenario, but in
Okay.
life and in supply chain, in practical supply chain management, very rarely does the situation present itself exactly as the theory outlines.
Okay.
So even though in textbook the theory might be fine and you use it to solve certain textbook problems, in real
Okay.
life it is only a guide. It gives you a sense or a direction in terms of what are the things you might want to factor or consider
Okay.
as a theory would. But in terms of actually coming up with a practical solution, oftentimes you're going to have to stray from the theory a bit because your
Okay.
circumstance isn't exactly as the theory described. So
Okay.
it does give you familiarity, but it doesn't solve all of the problems practically for sure.
Okay. Okay. Since you said you have some kind of background in theory and you've given us some insight of a theory, I know one thing that also even worry or confuse academia is how the theories are developed. Do you have any idea about how, because you know something about theory, but do you have any idea how theories are developed from a participant perspective?
That's a good question. I can't say 100% that I know exactly how the theories are developed. I mean, I know for sure, obviously, there is a large amount of observation, looking for, causality, looking at relationships between different variables and so on. And, when this causality is found, when the link between certain variables are established, it starts to give birth to, well, you know what, well, maybe there's a connection via this relationship. So therefore, this theory says X, under certain conditions would result in Y. So I know generally that's the path that it would take in general theory development. But even as I mentioned before, there are some drawbacks and downfalls in that approach, because have you considered all of the variables that really impact or link your inputs to your outputs, right?
Yeah.
You might identify some key ones, but that may not be all of the variables. And also too, that may only represent the variables at the point in time that your data represents. To have a more broad-based or encompassing theory, you may need to look beyond what your data or your data set suggests. So, you could be developing your theory on incorrect assumptions based on the data set that or the observations that you're monitoring. So, that would be my guess in terms of how they're developed and some of the pitfalls around why it may not be as reflective of actual, practical situations as you would want it to be.
Okay, that's quite insightful. Well, there's this thing that also kind of confuses some practitioners and probably some academia, but I will still, like I said, I will still ask you a question from a participant perspective. Supply chain and supply chain management. Share your understanding on supply chain management with us.
Okay, well, I mean, you can go by the definition of supply chain as, the supply chain is that network of companies that that allow for the movement of goods from a source to conversion point all the way to the customer. So that network of companies and associations, that is the supply chain. Supply chain management is, well, it's just the management, the oversight, the administration of all of those activities and actors, companies, logistics enterprises that are responsible for procuring, moving the good from source to conversion location, managing it at or handling it at conversion location, and then moving it out to the customer. The management of and oversight of all of those activities, that will be what we define as supply chain management. But your basic supply chain is that network that moves the good from source to customer.
Okay, that's great. All right. From practitioner perspective, how would you see operations management as against supply chain management, or operations and supply chain? There's this confusion that one is bigger than the other. So
yes, and you can argue the same thing for supply chain versus logistics. It's used interchangeably. People talk about supply chain when they mean logistics, really, and then people talk about logistics when they mean supply chain. So operations management and supply chain management is the same thing. And actually, this is where my formal training kicks in a bit more, in that I've always been taught that logistics is a subset of supply chain management, for example. Logistics is the movement and storage of the goods within that network and moving goods from source to customer. Supply chain management goes beyond that. Supply chain management includes sourcing, includes procurement. That's not logistics. So supply chain management is the broader field of all of the activities required to source, to buy, to move that product from source to customer, of which logistics is a part. Operations management and supply chain management is similar. Operations management tends to more focus around managing the entire conversion activities within the four walls of a manufacturing or production plant. Supply chain is supportive of that, in that supply chain, yes, has that as a subset, because as you move goods from source to customer, there's a conversion aspect. So operations management tends to be a subset of supply chain management as well, where when you get within the four walls of a manufacturing facility or manufacturing operation, there's conversion activity happening. That conversion activity falls under the umbrella of operations management, but end to end is your supply chain management definition.
Right, that's quite good. We'll come back to the theories again. You have spoken, you have given us some insights about theories in other way, but how important theories to you as a practitioner?
They are important. I definitely would not minimize theories for sure. They do have their relevance. And as I alluded to earlier, it gives you a starting point, right? I always think it's better to read and at least have an understanding of what is the common body of knowledge, what is the common thought. It doesn't mean that you have to follow it exactly for your scenario. It might be a little bit different, but at least you're starting with a good frame of reference rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. So from understanding supply chain theory on a particular topic, it gives you that good frame of reference to begin the conversation, to begin the thought process. And then you can apply what is unique in your own scenario or your situation to tailor a solution. But I think you will get there a lot faster by starting from a theory-based approach than starting from a complete scratch where you have no idea on how to approach a problem. So it gives you a good starting point, but it is by no means the be-all and end-all on how to solve that particular problem.
Okay. Which means that you do consider theories when you're making supply chain decisions. Is that the case?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there are certain ways you're taught to manage distribution. The MRP approach. If you're looking at multi-echelon, you have a dependent demand situation. So that's a well-established theory. So if you find yourself in a multi-echelon dependent demand scenario, you're going to lean on the principles and theories around how do you manage in a dependent demand, multi-echelon supply chain. That's very relevant because a lot of what you're going to see falls within that theory. You're going to have situations that are a bit outside or outside the box, but that happens in any scenario. But at least you start off saying, well, you know what? I know this is a dependent demand scenario. So the best logic or the best approach to take is one of like MRP logic, and what MRP theory talks about. That's a very good starting point.
Okay, that's quite insightful. I think the interview comes to an end. We have captured all important aspects of what we want to talk today. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Well, I mean, thanks. Great to be here. Great to offer any tips or any insights and so on that I can.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks a lot. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.